Welcome to the Not Good Podcast with your host, David Jane, presented by Sky High Media, LLC. The views and opinions of the Not Good Podcast are not necessarily that of Sky High Media, LLC.
All right, welcome to the Not Good Podcast. I'm your host, David Jane, and I'm joined with Tim Worrells, baby. Pastoral Roles. I thought of this title. You might have thought of it, or we both might have thought of it when we were talking. Because I always go when there's a church I hear about, I'll go to the About Us section and then meet our leadership or whatever that's called. And every time I get talking with a pastor that, we can have a conversation, I always ask them what an executive pastor does. And typically I get different responses based on the needs of the ministry. Yeah. But I just like seeing all of the titles of some larger churches have all kinds of pastors. There's a pastor of discipleship, pastor of pastoral ministry, pastor of pastoral care, executive pastor, just to name a few. I mean, worship pastor, children's pastor, youth pastor, next gen pastor. I mean, all these kinds of things. What do they do? We talked in our very first few episodes about what we each did.
Yeah.
And arguably when you go to a 2 or 3 hour lunch, someone might look at that on the outside and not know everything that entails.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're actually eating, when you're discipling or you make a visit, there's a lot of things you can do on the way to and on the way from. Someone texts you and then you got to run by somewhere. Someone's late to your meeting and you're waiting on them. And it's, something like that can happen to where someone that's just at the church office, like, dude, he just went on a 2.5 hour lunch. Like, what just happened?
Right. Yeah.
But I'll sometimes I meet with my old pastor once a week ish, like once every couple weeks, once a week. But I mean, I'll be gone for maybe 2 hours, but that's like a kind of a discipling, mentoring, ventilating session of what's going on in my ministry. And it's something that keeps me healthy because then I can come back and have an outside perspective on, hey, you're not crazy for going through this.
Right.
I don't know.
The conversations I hate worse with, or the most, excuse my grammar, the conversations I hate the most would be when people are like, hey man, how you been? How's your week been? I'm like, it's been good. Has it been busy? I'm like, yeah, it's been really busy. I'm exhausted. They're like, what all did you do? I'm like,
uh-oh.
I've had like 3 lunches with 3 individuals, met with someone the other day in my office for 2 hours. I studied a lot. We had prayer meeting, got ready for Sunday. But meanwhile, if you really look at the amount of hours I put toward working on stuff, for sure 40 hours, if not 50, I've been in the office. But to the common person that goes to work, and like you just mentioned, that they have 1 hour and 5 minutes of that hour is them getting their lunch ready, and then 5 minutes is throwing it away to get back in their cubicle. My 2 hour lunch just to get discipled seems like that's something I should be doing on my own time. So, but it's not. As pastors, we carry physical, emotional, and spiritual weight every day. And so where people clock out, I like to argue that we never clock out. Literally when we put our heads down, either we're getting a phone call, text, message on social media somehow, some way, or at the end of the day, you're putting your head down saying, I could have done more, or I could have reached out to that person. Oh, I forgot to text that person. Oh, I forgot to call that person. And it just the grind never stops. So
yeah.
I hate when people ask me for the details of what my day looked like, because it sounds like that's a field day for them during the work day. But better, just as good as me, it's just like, I want to break from this. I'd rather clock in, clock out some days.
Yeah. Me and my pastor were just having a conversation yesterday. He was a missionary for 20 years, and his last last kind of country, he went to 3 different countries in Latin America. When they came back to America, it was Ecuador that they were in. And he was telling me it's interesting because you're giving 100% of your time in your ministry and you're always a missionary. It's not like you can go home and, clock out. And then if someone knocks on your door, you're like, oh, go, come back tomorrow. We open at 8:30 a.m. It's not like you can do that. It's
Right.
no, you're going to disciple these people. He mentioned going back to America, and he lives right now in a parsonage that's 2 doors down from where the church is. So he said it's harder almost now than back then because the just because of the issues and how close he is to the church, it's like he doesn't get to kind of clock out. It's one thing to, get a phone call. It's another thing for someone to say, "Hey, this person's here. Can you come on down to the church and meet with them?" And he's like, just put food in the oven, for
Yeah.
It's just like, man, I don't want that job.
It's non-stop. Sometimes I help the funeral home in our town. Like literally, I went to school with the guy that owns it now, and so sometimes when the family doesn't have a pastor, they'll call me just to see if I would do the service, which I almost always say yes if I can. But then also there's times where they're like, "Hey, do you just want to work tomorrow? Parking cars, helping us get the casket out to the cemetery."
Mhm.
Super easy job. Like it's the easiest money in the world, and he even says that. But I love it. Like I just did it a couple of days ago, and it was like refreshing to me because you literally they have the old time cards where you literally you slide in under,
Yeah.
it stamps it, and it's like I know what we have to do today. We're doing this, and we're going here between these hours, and then clocking out, and I just go home, and I'm like, it is so relieving to do that. Like
Hmm.
I just worked 7 to 8 hours for them and it was mindless, and I'm going home and I don't have to think about what I did at the funeral home anymore because I clocked out. That doesn't happen with ministry. And, a couple of episodes ago, we really talked about churches becoming country clubs because members have that country club mentality. Man, it's killing pastors. I think that's why I think the author of Hebrews says one time, that you need to, I forgot the wording, but in essence, what he's trying to convey is that you need to allow your leaders to lead well. While you have them, and
Hmm.
don't make it hard on them. And this is not a whining session for us here on this podcast, but that's church ministry in America now. Is that there's so many expectations out there to meet. In order for you to do quote unquote ministry well. I think if we did ministry well according to what Jesus standards only, our churches would be so low and empty.
Hmm.
Again, John 6:66. I go to that a lot, and some of the disciples turned their back on him and walked away. And then the very next verse, 67, he looks to his inner 12, and he's like, "Do y'all want to join them too, or are you in? Like, you want to leave because you can." And anyways, I'm going on a rabbit trail that I think I always go on, but the country club mentality is killing pastors, and that's why I think more
Yeah.
churches are hiring so many staff to meet every single little need that the congregants are saying that they want.
Hmm. No, totally. Because I was double checking our topics list. It was 5 and 14. Um, so the reason that I kind of thought of number 5 was one of the things that we're going through at our church is people have an incorrect view of who the pastor ministers to.
Yeah.
So, without going into too much detail about the actual issue that our church has, it's been said that, well, the children are here, so they have a children's pastor. The youth are here, so they have a youth pastor. The senior pastor is for the older people.
Mm.
And that's where it's incorrect because the senior pastor is over everything and he doesn't get to just show up to the functions of the senior citizens,
Yeah.
and then that's fulfilling his role. In many ways, the older generation should be mature enough to realize that when the pastor spends time with the college career young adults ministries, that's because they might need that guiding and shepherding that the older people did not get, or did should have gotten, and maybe they didn't. um I don't want to say into too much detail, but I think they have an incorrect view, and maybe it's not their fault, but also maybe that they should have also been doing their own studying and everything. So they should have realized that the direction we are and have been going since our pastor has been at this church almost 3 years is a biblical direction, and it's not trying to undermine their entire existence at this church. But it's very discouraging, but that's where we're at in a lot of churches, not just mine.
Yeah, I need to do some research on trends of the church, but I just feel like across the board, and I feel like we can say this because everyone in this age group, I guarantee, is not listening to a podcast, nonetheless, ours. So, like, I feel like churches back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe 70s, just completely ruined everything. If I could just say that
Yeah.
right now. Like, first of all, my title here is senior pastor. I want to change. I am going to change that because that's number one where it goes wrong. I think you said your pastor's titled senior pastor as
Mm-hmm.
well. That's the wrong title. It should be lead pastor. Because as you mentioned, we are the lead pastor. We are leading this church, and any staff members under us are under our leadership. And so it's not senior pastor. Number one, I'm not a senior. And number two, I'm not only a pastor to the seniors. You've hired
Yeah.
me to lead this flock. Um, but then on the other end of things, during those years of church, and I'm just thinking of like my grandmother, who's now in heaven, loved the Lord, lived a great godly life, but I saw her flares up in attitudes toward pastors, and now that I've
Mm-hmm.
been in it for almost 7 years in the lead role, I just started thinking like, and kind of the the landmines that we've had to navigate here is around that mindset back in the day of one pastor maybe being the guy on the pedestal, but he is to preach and he is to visit. Visit. If you don't visit, one of the big things that I want to barf at is when people say, well, he's a good preacher, but he's not a very good pastor.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean by that? Like he can preach,
Mm-hmm.
but man, he just don't come visit me. I'm at the age of being a dad where my daughter is about to turn 3 years old, and she's starting to get to that phase where she can kind of occupy herself for like moments of the day.
Yeah.
Where it's been frustrating because it's like just constant dad, 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 mom, 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 which we love. But if you're trying to get stuff around the house done,
Mm-hmm.
frustrating because they have to be on your hip. Well, I think of like as we grow in our spirituality, we were fed a bottle, and then all of a sudden our parents handed us the fork and the spoon. All of a sudden we're feeding ourselves. And all of a sudden, like we should mature up to the ability that one day we will have our own kids and we can share that knowledge of how to feed ourselves to others.
Mm-hmm.
And you just mentioned it, like if you've been a believer for a long time, the less you should be dependent on the pastor being hooked to you at all
Yeah.
times. The more you mature, the more you should be able to live independently in your walk with Jesus.
So our pastor's wife just recently started a Bible study geared towards young single women. And there was an age range, but it was like, say it's 18 to mid 20s, but they were like, anyone's welcome to come, but the topics of this Bible study are geared toward this. He had to say something because someone complained about that. And he was like, in Titus talks about the older women teaching the younger women, or as a following that principle the whole way down the line, the older people teaching the younger people. And for some reason, like a country club, they want a program for them
Yeah.
and they want to just constantly be fed. And I heard our executive youth pastor say that he was like, we're just obese with knowledge
Hmm.
and we just want to sit and receive and we don't want to do anything with it. We don't even want to digest what we hear
Yeah.
because there's not a chance to think through the pastor's sermon Sunday when there's something totally different Sunday night and then there's something totally different Wednesday night. And then a few days later, we're just ready for the next step in the series, the next chapter in the book.
Yeah.
And so we're not digesting and chewing and everything that Christ called us to do, with instruction.
Well, we have to answer, why are we doing what we're doing? And if you were to survey your church right now, anyone listening, if you were to survey your church right now and ask them, what are we doing as a church? Like why are we here? Why are we functioning? Um you would get answers all over the place. Like, well, we're here to have Bible studies. We're here to have fellowships. We're here to have blah blah blah. Um when you really look at scripture, that's what I meant earlier. If we were really doing ministry according to Jesus's way only, we would lose the majority of our people, because Jesus's ministry that he started, passed the baton on to us, and expects us to carry today, is go. As you're going, go out. The disciples asked, that prayer, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Oh, the laborers are few, Well, at the end of that prayer,
Yeah.
Jesus is like, now go to the disciples, the ones praying that he just talked to. He's like, you go. You're the answer to your prayers. Go. Like, you take personal responsibility. But then, coming back to the situation you just brought up, then that's why we have a visitation pastor now. And that's why we have a next steps pastor. And that's why we have a discipleship pastor and a youth pastor and a children's pastor and a secretary and and all these things, because we're trying to accommodate for the needs of the people, because they're making minors into majors and not majoring in them, anyways. But that's
Yeah.
to get to your topic for the day. How many pastors are too much, and what's the role of the pastor? The role of the pastor is just to be a shepherd. It's to protect and to feed, and to guide and to vision for the flock, take them where they need to go. And he's become a hospice, nurse, doctor, and he's become a whatever, he's become a friend, and he's become a whatever you want, but entertainer. He's just supposed to protect, feed, and guide the flock of sheep.
The opposite, when you were saying all that, I was thinking of the term jack of all trades. And then the other name of that is master of none.
Yeah.
So if you expect your pastor to do all of these things, expect him not to be great at anything.
Yeah.
Because you're taking his energy and focus away from protecting and feeding and turning him into, oh, well, we need him to do this. So let's, each thing you're taking some time away, and you can give him all the money that you have, but he only has a certain amount of time, and he's not going to be able to be good at anything, a master of anything. Our pastor's strong suit is preaching. So when we want him to make all these hospital visits, there's so many reasons, you can make hospital visits as a pastor, whether it's someone, someone who's actually in the church, someone they might know. I mean, if you wanted to, you could probably find a reason to go every day. He can be that guy if you want him to, but his main role is, like you said, to guide, protect, and then also to feed, preach the word.
Well, and that's what gets to the sticky line of having multiple pastors, which I would argue plurality of elders, pastors, is the way to go. But then on the other end, we should be equipping and unleashing our people to do the work of the ministry as well.
Yeah.
So there is a line as we get into this topic of having multiple pastors compared to what most churches have gone through decades of. We have one guy, he's the guy behind the pulpit. I hear that a lot, and which is flattering, but it's wrong. And then, but we are supposed to be bringing up our own people to be unleashed to go do the work of the ministry. And so it's a tough balance. There is a ratio out there. I think I was just looking at it on my phone just to double check me. The Renewal Network and a couple other people have put this out. It's actually gone down. It used to be one pastor per like 125 members or attendees. Then they've dropped it to 100. And then here recently, a couple of them are now saying between 75 to 100 attendees, you should have a full time pastor
Wow.
on staff. So I like the 75 range because think about it. I mean, how many people can you really touch on regularly? I mean, 75 is a lot. So if you want to
Mhm.
care for 75 people well, um, you probably could have one pastor to be able to do that, but 100 and 125 per one pastor, I thought was a little over the edge. So there is a ratio I think that is more tangible to go after to determine how many pastors. Now that's paid full-time pastors.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that point up. Like, there might not be the finances to have 75 people pay for one pastor.
Yeah.
That's a that's some high income, high earners that are contributing 10%. Is that a trigger word?
Tithing.
Yeah, to be able to finance, I mean, a person per 75, even 125.
Yeah.
There's been numbers at our at my last church, there wouldn't have been enough. They were they should have technically, say we had 250 at my last church. That's two full-time pastors, and instead there was one full-time and then two part-times, but the two part-times would not equal one full-time salary either.
Mm. Yeah.
And then that was also I was I was music and kids, so that's two jobs to make one part-time
Mm.
salary according to all of the titles today. But yeah, that's something else we can get into, is what needs oversight from a staff member and what's okay with maybe someone trusted by the church, is leading this ministry.
Yeah, I think deacons play a part in that too. Eventually, I think a lot of pastors are on staff. Let's talk. If your church is financially able to hire more people, then I'm all for hire more people. The more you can hire, the more you can get done. Obviously,
Mm,
that's my mindset. We were running 3 pastors this past year for 200 a Sunday, so we were pushing the envelope a little bit. Kind of a visionary sense of like we're bringing this third guy on because we're almost to that, you know, third 75
mm,
area, but we were pushing it. We're down to 2 now, but and that's where we're going to kind of land for a little while, maybe some part time at the beginning of the year. But um, if you're able to hire, what I'm saying is there's a lot of churches that I think are trying to build a staff to be over certain areas of the church. Where in reality, if they've got deacons, the deacons can be overseeing a lot of the hands-on
yeah.
like administrative pastors. Like I've tried that before, and we've just dissolved it now to a couple of deacons are taking care of all what the administrative pastor would have been doing. Because deacons are the ones that are supposed to be stepping in and getting the administrative tasks done. But you hear like a lot of administrative, and I think some churches, executive and administrative, are kind of the same. But I think deacons can fill in that role pretty well too. We're
Hmm.
undermining the deacon way too much today because of past baggage. We need to bring back the deacon and elevate it to where Scripture put it. Deacons are vital to the unity of the church, and I'll go to bat for them any day.
I would say with the mindset that they don't run the church
Hmm.
either,
Yes, yeah.
because I mean, I would never say where, but that is certainly an issue in some churches today,
Was
that
here.
that the deacons run the church. And it was even said, so I've heard, at some church that I would, certainly couldn't name, but that the pastor suggested something, and then a member of the deacon board said, why don't you just worry about preaching? We'll take care of this. When you're
Mm-hmm.
elevated that far above, what your view of the senior pastor, lead pastor is, it's not like I mean, I feel like they have more of a general manager vibe, and you're just a player on the team. You know, we can. It's like, did you see The Last Dance on Netflix about Michael Jordan?
I didn't, believe it or not,
Okay,
basketball stuff, and I didn't
thought
even
you would
watch it.
have. So, and they just talked about how domineering, I guess, that general manager was, and and he was just basically they can have the mentality of I'm okay. We all know who's really in charge. It's me and the owner, and then these are all just players, and we can kind of throw them around and do what. But you know, some places might have that mentality as a board or deacons or whatever, and
Hmm.
so there's the it should biblically, I think, as you've mentioned before, working together. Maybe at the direction, you know, it's, and we've said it all before, but when you elect a leadership position, you kind of at some point have to step back and trust that they're going to do what you've elected them to do.
Yeah. 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 Well, let's do. I'm gonna add deacons to our notepad here on the phone.
Yeah.
Maybe the next episode could be solely deacons because I think maybe some. I think an episode would be good on talking about what deacons shouldn't be, but what they should be and why,
Yeah.
when they are what they should be, it's so vital to the church. Because I've been on both sides. I've been on the damaging effects of a deacon board thinking they're elders, and running out the two pastors, to now I would say we have like the best deacon board in the world, and like I love being
Nice.
around them now. So I would love to do that. And so maybe we could
Yeah.
just I'm really wanting to get on that topic, but I don't want to take away from the pastoral talk today of
Yeah.
I do have a question for you. It'd be
Okay.
fun. It'd be fun to hear your answer on this. It would be we did this in Bible college for one of our pastors' classes, but if you were to like plant a church next week, um, what would be your top three? You would be hire number one, obviously, so lead pastor. So what would be your next two pastoral hires? What would be the titles?
Hmm. I'd probably do a next gen pastor.
Hmm.
I like that title.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah. And then a worship pastor.
Yeah, that's mine. It'd be myself, obviously, number one. And then yeah, I'd probably go worship pastor number two, just because,
Hey man.
I see that hand. Because we've got to have themed services, so a guy's gonna have to run that for me.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
psych. Anyways, but the first thing we're gonna be doing as a church planner is worshiping. So I would want a worship leader, but then, like you said, I would want a student pastor or I'll go with the next gen title. That sounds
Yeah.
so much more modern and cooler.
Yeah.
And kind of takes up from toddlers all the way up to high schoolers.
Yeah. You could just give all of those age groups to one person instead of having to divide it out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But then right behind that would have to be a secretary because I really don't know where I'd be without our secretary. Um, but pastorally wise, I think having those three pastors are key
Mm-hmm.
to ministry. And you know, how many's too many? Well, I would say the ratio 1 to 75. You got to be budgetly friendly. But if you got a lot, if you're sitting on a lot of money, then the hire,
Yeah.
staff members and outreach. Use it, because the more staff you have and you lead them well, you should be reaching more. And if you're spending more money outreaching, then boom, you should be reaching more. So, but those are the three that I would do. Would too. Wouldn't be executive guy. Wouldn't be next steps guy. That's critical. I do believe eventually, but again, that's develop a system. A systems. And kind of plug it through. You don't need the next gen guy or the next connections guy.
Yeah, because if you have a system, it's like when you get hired somewhere, and we've talked about this before, you're given an employee handbook, and these have everything you need to know to be an employee here, your
Hmm.
benefits, the rules, everything. So instead of having a person to oversee something like that, just here you go.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a hire friendly guy, but I'm getting to the point where I don't. I would rather not hire anymore because I do think we have a problem in our churches, and that is membership is not taking personal responsibility themselves. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we need leaders. We have a leadership drought in churches today, and it's because they're just depending on us hiring another guy. Whereas I would say the majority of churches don't need to hire another guy; they need to raise up leaders. And that's the problem. Pastors aren't good at raising up leaders because they're only supposed to preach and to visit. You know, how about leadership development?
Well, what if we just pay all of our volunteers?
Hey, that here that in the past they wanted to like anyone who volunteered more than a few hours a month. They're like, let's give them a check. I'm like, no, like
Yeah.
let them do it. It finally took someone. They're like, we're gonna pay her. She's here every week. Every time we ask her to do something, is piano player, a second piano player, and they try to pay her. Like this was like 10 years ago when I was on staff as a youth guy, and she literally came back and said, no, I would prefer doing it as a service, like
Wow.
as a sense of worship. And I remember sitting in the room with the guys, and of course I was the young guy that didn't know anything, just like I still am. But they're like, they were like baffled, like why wouldn't she take this money? I'm like, maybe she wants to worship the Lord with her gifts. You know, like
Yeah.
we don't have to pay everyone. Someone mops the floor here, and they're like, oh, we'll pay you weekly every time you mop the floor. I'm like, no, let him mop the floor. Like you just took his worshipful heart to now, like literally, I've seen volunteers get paid and their whole heart changes after that.
Yeah.
So, I would pay everyone. You know, Good Friday services. I'm coming in with gift cards to our praise team because they went above and beyond that weekend. So I'm all about giving money out, you know, to show appreciation. But when you put them on the salary, it changes. Sometimes I've got to check my heart. Like if I wasn't a full time pastor, would I still be passionate about the things that I'm pushing right now? Because we can't let the paycheck drive us. You know,
Yeah.
we still have to serve the Lord out of a willing heart.
Our church started like most other churches and that have been around for several decades. And there was always like a pianist, or an accompanist.
All right, music guy.
Yeah. And they did not have the money to have her on full time as a line item. So they would take up love offerings. So that's the practice, is that twice a year they would take up a love offering. And recently there's a certain dollar amount that they try to hit with each offering. But over the years, it was just going to one person.
Hmm.
As you know, you add instruments. I guess 10 years ago, there was only two or three accompanists, instrumentalists, you could say. And then about 10 years ago, they started the praise band. Well, then when they take up this offering, who is the offering for? Because
Hmm.
you now have at least four people in the praise band, three people on the instrumentalist side. They all contribute to the music ministry of the church, but the offering is only going to three of them.
Hmm.
So that's my quandary is so I'm this is 6 months, 7 months into my time here. I learn about this because they start to advertise the offering in the bulletin. So as it's explained to me, I found out that it was not split evenly because certain members would designate their
Hmm.
check to one of the three or to two of the three, excluding a third one or the second and third one.
Hmm.
So then how they kept up with that was the designated portion would just go to them. But then throughout the year, this is the protocol, is that he would take attendance, and whoever played Sunday morning and Sunday night, whoever played more, it was performance based. So if you played
Mm,
4 songs in the week and this person only played two, you would get twice the amount of money across 52 Sundays.
wow.
So it was prorated. So this person might have, I don't know, 52 check marks because they played every Sunday, and this person might have 50. But I was like, what a nightmare. Just split it evenly,
Right.
except for the
Yeah.
designated stuff.
A
And I
lot to
don't
keep
even
up
like,
with.
yeah, I don't even like the designations. So I guess the treasurer mentioned taking it to the board and seeing what they thought. So I think the designated portions, because they refused to, the conversation was also had, well, you just give it directly to that person since you want to designate it, but they want the tax write-off, so they give it to the church, and then the
Mm.
church, it's like a clearinghouse,
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I walked into. So my general view on ministry is that you shouldn't pay people unless we were going on tour, unless we were Hillsong or Elevation where we were taking it out on the road, then of course we're going to compensate people. But yeah, when you have a local weekly ministry that you are contributing to, offerings are fine, but then when it's a guaranteed amount, we they've extended it a couple weeks just to make sure there was enough money that came in, because now, like it or not, they expect that money.
Mm.
And so I don't think that's helped contribute to the atmosphere of our ministry here, but like it or not, that's where we are. So we're just kind of working with what we got, and
Mm.
I have no problem. Like at first I like giving gift cards.
Yep.
Thank you guys. Like each offering, they shoot for about $3,000, and that's so twice a year. So that's more than gift cards. You know, that's that's a pretty big gift card.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a kind of a frustrating circumstance for me, and I will not prorate it like they're
Yeah.
used to. So I think they just split it evenly with the designations that came in. So and the anyway, it was a headache. I mean, that's crazy. Does that not sound crazy?
Well, for a while there, in the last few years, this is the first year we didn't have this situation, but we've always had a paid pianist, and just like you guys, we went praise team oriented really only about 5 years ago. But so what we had was a volunteer worship leader organizing the whole thing, volunteer, but the pianist was paid, and that got real um testy because we took the pianist position out because we're like we got two guitar players, we got drummer, we got keyboard, and we got like five singers that rotate
Hmm.
that are there every week. And we want the praise team to be it's weird because it's like in scripture, the pastor is worthy of double honor. Um, so there is a case for pastors to be compensated, but like you just mentioned, like I also don't want to some positions. I think I mentioned in the first part was like there's a lot of positions that we're making in churches today that deacons can take care of
Hmm.
or members can take care of. I don't want to get into the point of paying people to use their spiritual gift. I just want them to use their spiritual gift for the building up of the kingdom of God out of worship. They don't need to be paid um, for it. So like here, our student pastor, like the other pastor on staff, like I expect I expect our staff to serve in our church too, if that makes sense. So
Hmm.
we're not just here to work; we're here to serve too. So where are you serving, and what Bible group are you part of? And so he plays on the praise team, and he's involved in that area, and you know I don't know. I don't want to pay people to use their spiritual gifts, and to compensate. I don't know. It's just, and then designation of offerings. We should have talked about that when we talked about tithing, because
Hmm.
I don't see any designation of offerings in scripture. And I know a lot of people get a little uptight about that, but designation can, I think that's one of the front doors to division. And it seems like, we're seeing that a lot. But, anyways, I'm with you. It's hard. We had a paid pianist, but the person doing all of the music organization and leading was volunteer. That was weird for a while.
Yeah. And it's almost sometimes with a pastor, I won't name who it was, but they decided to they decided to pay their praise band because of the size of their church. And he was like, I've asked several churches about our size and our area, and they pay their praise band, so we're going to start doing that. And then what happened was people just started coming to the church. This is we'll get back to pastoral roles, but this I feel like this has to be said. Then what happened was there was no you didn't have to be there. I mean, you could just start going and, hey, you play guitar, why don't you come? And then it's a paycheck to kind of someone you put on the stage, and they haven't really established themselves in the church. And we've had me and my pastor now have had a conversation, and it's come to the church for 6 months before you really get plugged into any kind of ministry, especially one where you're on the stage.
Yeah.
And so I was glad, yeah, that my church now is not like that. But this I learned of this situation, and I'm all about appreciating people,
Yeah.
but paying people, like you said, to use their spiritual gift, it seems kind of weird, and it can change someone's heart not for the better when you begin to expect something regularly.
And that's how we keep in check here. I'm sure some people listening will be like, well, you guys are paid by the church. And I think, again, as I mentioned, the way we just try to keep in check here is making sure that we are serving outside of our job descriptions, as an act of worship. Because again, if I wasn't in full-time ministry, would I be as passionate about the church, and would I be as passionate about the ministry as I am? And I would want to say yes. Well, then I need to be serving in other areas outside my job description to prove that and to walk in that. But yeah, I don't want to. We're not going to get into paying the greeters. We're not going to get into paying the
Right.
media crew, and we're not going to get into paying, the nursery crew and stuff like that. It goes right down the line. And so if you have a gifting and you have a passion to serve the Lord, then your time and your treasure is never questioned. Like, you're never going to ask, when do I get a paycheck? And gift cards are great. And usually the people who are really in it to serve the Lord are almost always shocked that I would even give them a gift card. They're like, you didn't have to do this. Like, really? Like, it's usually just like a $10 gift card because you're buying like 20 of them. And I don't know, just the heart behind it. It matters all the time. But us paid people need to keep our hearts checked too.
Yeah. Like I took at my last church, I helped with the children's ministry too, and I gave each of our volunteers that were kind of the leaders, and it was a weekend, Friday to Sunday afternoon, but I gave them a $50 gift card, and they were like, "You, you don't need to do that." And I was like, "Man, y'all gave up your weekend, It's like the least we can do."
Yeah, yeah.
But it was neat to. They were very thankful, which was cool. So pastoral roles. And we talked last episode about how some people imagine the children's pastor for the children, the youth for the youth, the senior pastor just for the older people. But then that's where it gets conflated, because the senior pastor is the umbrella over the whole ministry of church. Unless you then have and we talked about the lead pastor. Then you have maybe over the preaching and vision. Then you might have an executive pastor over the ministries. And by all means, if you can afford that, because we then mentioned that statistic of one pastor for 75, if you can financially accomplish that.
Yeah. I think especially lead pastors, the church in general, but the pastors above all else, I mean, they should be spending time in prayer. That sounds so like cliche Sunday school answer, but just think if pastors spent time praying their hearts out over the people that God has entrusted them. Like the statistic of guys falling out of ministry due to sin or whatever else would drastically go down. And I don't know just how much Satan is in the churches today. Like prayer should be one of the ministries of the pastor, and the studying and the preaching of God's word and to the prayer ministry, as Acts says, in Acts 6, the reason deacons were formed is so that the apostles can devote themselves to that. So protecting the flock and teaching, feeding, and then the praying. Like praying is not just this fanciful thing to do. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, we need to pay you to pray. Well, yes and no, but the important aspect of the pastor's job is to pray, and we don't pray at all. At all. People who preach on prayer, they're not praying. People who say we need to pray more, they're not praying. And one of our buddies years ago, both of us, mutual friend that we both have, he reached out to me. He was like, "What resources do you have on prayer?" And I was like, "The only resource I have is one question for you." And he was like, "What?" I was like, "Why don't you pray more?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "I guarantee you don't pray at all." And you're about to preach it, and you put a high value on prayer, but why don't we start praying? And everyone listening right now, like, when's the last time you've really prayed? And I have no idea if this is the direction you want me to go with that question just now, but
Yeah.
prayer is prayer is the job of a pastor, and we're not doing it. We so undermine prayer in our daily lives. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. And pastors, even like I said, above and beyond. You as a worship guy should be praying for your church and for the ways that we should lead people in worship through song and the hearts of your people on stage, because they
Mhm.
reflect the face of your church. And then myself in the position I'm in, like where are we going, Lord? And I cannot do this apart from you every day. And it's amazing to me. It'd be so scary if God gave us a glimpse of even let's just leave lead pastors on the table. If God gave us a glimpse of the true amount of time lead pastors spend in praying for their churches, it'd be revealing.
Yeah, I'm lucky to have a pastor. Man, we talked earlier this week, and God kind of used that conversation and then some alone time conversation with God. Like I need to start praying for my ministry, because then there's this group that I might catch a hard time from. I should be praying for them,
Yeah.
praying for a change. And there's certain things about our church that they might be rooted in something a little deeper than just bad attitudes.
Mm,
And we need to be praying for those things and praying that, God casts these things out, whatever they are. I'm
yep.
not saying that we have possessed people going to our church, but
Hey.
certainly influential, influenced by
Yeah.
some things. And we talked about Ephesians 6:10 through 13, and how we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but against, then there's four things.
Yeah.
Like, man, we just don't even realize it, and we're so blind to it in America.
You'll never not love someone when you pray for them. Like even your enemies, like when you begin praying for them and their soul and whatever they're going through, you will it's impossible for you not to start loving them. Which, by the way, some of you are like, I don't want to love my enemy. Well, God has called you to love him, and if you love him, then guess what? You're going to love your enemies.
Mm,
And so yeah, prayer is, and we don't, maybe, sometimes we dive into this, but I'm not saying that, I'm charismatic or anything, but the problem that I have with like church settings like the one I'm in is we don't talk enough about the Holy Spirit, and we don't talk enough about the spiritual warfare that literally surrounds us, and that's even more reason why the pastors have to sit down and devote themselves to prayer,
Yeah.
and because spiritual warfare is so real. It's so real, and spiritual warfare is winning a lot of little battles right now with ministries.
I'm really lucky because our pastor is very sensitive to that. He not only was a missionary for 20 years in Latin
Mm,
America, but now his kids, his oldest daughter and her husband are missionaries in West Africa, and they're they encounter it weekly.
hmm
And it's cool because he can just almost see it in real life happen to, son-in-law and his daughter. And then I get the privilege of hearing about it, just to
Yeah.
make it real because it's, I was just telling someone the other day, if it wasn't the fact that in high school I went on missions trips to third world countries, I would be so out of touch,
Yeah.
with how good we have it. But I was able to see, I mean, if that's we're gonna have an episode on short-term missions, and I'm excited for that one because there's that video that kind of makes fun of it, and it's just a, vacation for some youth groups, and some people
Yeah.
make it into that. But
Yeah.
um, on that plus side, it was really neat to see. We would be in this city. I think of the Dominican Republic. We went there twice, and you fly into the city. I think it's Santo Domingo, and that's the one of the main cities at least. And we would visit and drive around and have the market, and we would buy stuff, and then it would be time to do our ministry, and we would do little pop-up VBS type things just for a couple hours. And you would think we'd travel hours and hours and hours, to get to this village where they live in tents they make themselves. It's not like Ozark tents or anything. It's like tents that they make themselves, and they for the day the men go away with their machetes and harvest sugar cane, and it's 10, 15 minutes outside that city. It's like, dude, these people have cars and stuff and then you just take a left and go
Yeah.
5 miles down the road, and here's this village that people are. It's wild
Mm,
to comprehend that it's that close. But if it weren't for that, I wouldn't have been able to kind of. I don't have like. I'm not saying I have some awesome perspective or anything, but I'm not blind to the fact that that is not in America.
right.
You know, certainly we have our issues with homelessness and everything, and I'm not trying to fly by those, but it's not that.
If I had the ability to force people to do what I want them to do, which I don't, but if I could, I always say I would have our church bus parked in the front on a Sunday morning, and a few people walking in, I would just divert to the bus and just simply take them to a different church in our area. It would definitely be hitting the jackpot to put them on a plane and take them to a third world country to
Yeah.
see what's going on, but like, that's how far comfortable we are, which is kind of scary. If you really think about it, it's kind of scary how comfortable we are in America, because the more quiet it is, it's like, okay, what's coming specifically for our country and for the churches here?
Yeah.
We're just in cruise control and lukewarm, which reading the letter in Revelation and lukewarm, he spits it out of his mouth because it's disgusting. It's just you're neither hot or cold. We can't even tell you how bad you are, or how good you are. You're just there. You're just so. Anyway, spiritual warfare is big. And David, you know what I just realized?
What's that?
Roles of the pastor. We just said protect. We just said feed. So I would replace that with preach
Protect, preach.
and pray.
Wow.
That's 3 PRs, baby.
Not only did you
Write a
have
book.
alliteration, and exactly, that's your next sermon.
It's at least a blog post. Just need a
Protect,
poem
preach,
now.
and pray. Three. I forgot about that. 3 points in a poem, baby.
Amen. Amen. And then at least say during point 3, now last thing, but then add
Yeah.
like 10 more things.
And And this morning, if you were
Preachers also procrastinate.
a bonus point, also PR. That's
Man, I'm
great.
good. We're so good,
Wow.
but not on this podcast.
JD
We're the
Greer, here we come.
not good podcast.
But this is good because it all does tie back into roles of the pastor, and these are the things that you're passionate about and that I'm passionate about. That just kind of opening the eyes to our congregations are too comfortable,
Yeah.
and they some things that I'm going through is people are nostalgic about
Mm.
certain things, and they've been led astray of what church should look like because now they have this idea, this is what we used to do 15 years ago and people loved this, so why don't we do it now? It's like, well, first of all, this is impossible to maintain without quality going down, which in some cases, in some areas, quality went down because, well, I'll just say the choir was singing like two songs on Sunday morning. There was a special every week. The choir sang Sunday night, so that's 3 songs a week that the choir's supposed to. And so we just got into this, and I wasn't. I just kind of heard about it, but bless those who came before me that had to keep up with that. But for me, that's not manageable. And for us to be practicing every week and then singing 3 songs the next week and then practicing, and then it's like you're constantly having to. I don't know how they learned new music. It was just
Yeah.
with that, and because I'm so used to, the college we went to had a really good choir program, and we would take the whole semester and maybe learn 7 or 8 songs,
Yeah.
you know, and that's twice a week for I don't know how long a semester was. It was 18, 16 weeks, something like that.
Hmm.
But that's all we did for an hour, a little over an hour, I think. And man, I don't know how. Anyway, yeah, that's my thing here. But people love it, and it's great when it lines up that way. But then they want to take the one Sunday every few months that it lines up, and why don't we do that every Sunday? It's like I thought of. It's like giving our pastor every fifth Sunday the kids are in the service,
Hmm.
and then after that service, he's at his office, and they know to go by his office and get a piece of candy. So it's like something fun for the kids to look forward to after being in big church, you know. And for the older people, it's like giving them a piece of candy every time there's a special and the choir sings and you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
they want a piece of candy every week and they're adults, so they can kind of demand it. And in many cases, for a long time, they got a piece of candy every week. And now when we take that away, that it's like a withdrawal, really.
Yeah.
They get really passionate about it.
I pay your paycheck, so
Yeah.
give me candy. And it goes, I heard this analogy of the church and I love it. It's, we need to go from being a cruise ship to a battleship. And the reason we've gotten into these mindsets is because the people think they're coming on a cruise ship. So therefore they have paid you, the pastor, to accommodate their entertainment. They
Mm,
want to decide you book a cruise, you get to choose what cruise ship you get to go on
yeah.
and what it offers. So that's how people are going about churches today. What's the pastor slash waiter slash entertainer is going to be there? What do they offer? And what can you do for me? And do they have a turn down service each night for me? If so, then I'm coming.
Yeah.
What can you give me? Instead, on the battleship, you've got the commanders, and every person that's coming on the battleship knows the common mission. Sounds pretty familiar. The Great Commission that we have to make disciples of the earth. So everyone coming on the battleship isn't there for a vacation. They're there to get the mission done.
Mm,
So the leaders on that ship, they realize like, yes, sir, they're gonna get us to in formation to align us to launch off the battleship to get this mission done. And I love
mm,
that. We as churches we need to go from cruise ships and start turning into battleships because There is a battle out there, spiritual warfare. We have a common mission. It's called the Great Commission. We need to get at it. But we're wasting way too much time with candy. What would that look like as churches if we just if we were obedient to Philippians 2 and let go of everything that we hold so closely to? Like literally says Jesus did not count it robbery,
Mm.
to be equal with God, a thing to be grasped. But instead let it go to come save us. Let it go. Like I just wish as believers we would let some things go that need to be let go of. And even, and I get it, pastors too need to let go. We need to let go of stuff that really don't matter. But at the end of the day, someone, one of our members asked me one time, we were actually hanging out on the golf course, and right before he teed off, he's really frustrated. And I was like, he's like, man, I was like, what's going on? He's just like, if we just all devoted ourselves to prayer, all of us, pastors, leaders, servants, congregants, whatever you want to say, if all of us would just devote ourselves to prayer, would we not come to the same conclusion? And I thought about it for a while. I was like, well, obviously that's not possible
Yeah.
practically because we're humans. But at the end of the day, it's kind of the same scenario that John gives us in First John. I write these things so that you do not sin. Oh, well, if you say it that way, John, that's really what I'm supposed to be doing is like, as a life of a Christian, my aim is to not sin anymore. Yeah, that's why he wrote that letter. I write these things so that you would not sin anymore. No more. No more sin in your life. But then that very next verse, he says, but if you do sin, then confess your sins, and he's faithful and just to forgive you and wash you away from all uncleanness. So, like, we are supposed to get to the same page. Like, let's all pray to come to the same conclusion because we're all praying to the same God who's already given us
Mhm.
his word. It's not practical. It probably won't happen that way. That should be the aim and goal. And when all is stripped away, like, let go of everything and just become before the Lord and what would come of it. But I think this is turning into worship rather than the pastoral roles. But
Well, it all ties into our 3 points of a pastor is to protect, preach, and pray.
yeah.
And these are the things that, you do need to protect. This is going into the protecting. And I was reminded of when you said talk something about golfing, that the debates when they both like
Oh, the
got like,
handicapped.
yeah, that's the biggest lie of all. Like, man, like they were talking about, they each had their own points, but it was like that was the biggest issue for both of them of the night is like Biden came alive when he was talking about his golf game, and then
Let's talk about that debate.
let's do it.
No, goodness, let's not.
Oh, okay. Like, man, we might as well. We're not in the pulpit after
That-
all.
well, I've been told I need to talk about it more in the pulpit, but that's a side issue.
Yeah. Is that one of our topics? I
I
think it
think.
is. That would be
Oh,
good to like if we waited somehow till November to talk about that.
oh, we definitely doing that.
Yeah. I've had my phone for so long. I have like 3 different folders of notes. Not my phone, but just the iCloud account. Yeah, dude, it's number 16. That would be good. I don't know if we can wait that long to talk about it, but that'd
It's
be
gonna be
good.
good.
Yeah. Well, we don't have to. I mean, we've definitely, I mean, if anything, we've given this part one and part two to give you 3 points about the roles of the pastor. And through it, we've just shared our thoughts on the things that we're currently going through of how we are trying to protect the congregation. And you've kind of gotten a music person's side and a lead pastor's side. So I don't think we've been off topic at all. It just shows that we're passionate about those things, that these are the struggles that we're going through. And man, it's just hard, but it all should be covered in prayer. And then we've just, there were certain reasons that I wanted to talk about on the front end that I talked about last episode that was discouraging to me, or frustrating more than discouraging.
Yeah.
And then this episode, you've gotten my side and your side and just the things that we go through, ministry behind the scenes, which is basically what this podcast is about.
And the good thing about those 3 points is no matter how many pastors you have on staff, paid, unpaid, pastors in general, no matter what their focus is on, they should be doing all three of those.
Mm.
So, as a worship guy, you're protecting, you're praying, and you're preaching. Like you're preaching through song, but you're also preaching to your team of why we're singing these songs, and you're shepherding this group. Obviously, I do in the lead role, but executive guys do, children's pastors do, all those, whatever connections, next steps, whatever it is, you got to do those three things. And so that's my big thing is like, how many pastors are too many? I don't know. How many is too less? Well, I think having more than one is good. It's healthy. It's biblical. But at the end of the day, whoever is considered a pastor at your church or recognized as that should be devoting themselves to those three areas within all that they do. So it's a tough job and an important job, but it's one of the most glorious jobs.
And we'll wait because I just had the thought of when you talked about we'll have that deacon episode, which would be cool. And we can talk about the difference of deacon, elder, pastor that some churches have, and they all have a title, and it's as if there's a pastor of discipleship, and like you mentioned, a next steps pastor and a next gen pastor, and there's all these things, and they, like you said, they all should be doing those 3 points. But it's kind of, I've not worked at a church where this has been the case, but I've observed that this pastor might have hired this person just to do part of his job that he didn't want to do.
Yeah.
And that gets kind of dicey, and that might be a stereotype of having multiple pastors. But
yeah,
if you do have that many, definitely make sure you have some stuff in writing about what they do, because I'm sure at some point someone will have had a question about it.
100%.
And then when you talk about voting those things in, and someone's like, what does this guy do other than this? And then you might have yourself in a weird situation.
Yeah.
Trying to think if there's anything else that we can add, because I don't want to get to the next and then be like, oh, I wish we would have talked about this on that episode that we didn't bring that up. But I think that's it, and it's all behind the scenes ministry. I'm not gonna not bring up something next episode because we can certainly treat it as a political debate where we have a certain amount of time, and then I'm going to circle back and talk about this. He said this.
Answer the question about childcare. Let me go back.
Look, childcare is not important. Let me go back and talk about this. He said this. This is a total lie. Oh yes.
Oh.
Now we're on the next question. I'll talk about the childcare. I will make it more affordable. Look, this guy's gonna make it way too expensive.
I'm just so grateful that no matter what direction November goes, we're in good hands.
Yes. Like State Farm is here. This episode brought to you by State Farm. We're in good hands even after the election in November.
Amen. Glory.
No, that'll be an exciting one.
Yo,
because I'm making fun of one of them, but really, I mean, that's probably the one I'll vote for. You feel, man, I don't look. It doesn't matter how we vote, just that we do vote. But there are certain things, I'm not going to tell anyone to vote a certain way. But man, I heard our commander in chief was at Camp David for an entire week with nothing to do but prepare for this debate. And this is the first election that there have been scheduled commercial breaks. There were 2 in that hour-and-a-half debate. This is the first time in history
Yeah.
that,
No
that
audience.
there have been breaks, yeah. And it was specifically to give the people debating a break. And it's like, wow. Feel,
At least they're in good health
yeah, thank goodness.
in their
Both
prime.
acing their cognitive tests. No one scored higher even. There's not been such a high score on those cognitive tests.
I bet.
I love I
I
love
trust
the
it.
give him one, give him a really easy one. He couldn't do the first 5 questions.
We
And then
should.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say we should have went live and just had a live
Yeah, we'll have to do that on the next one if there is one.
debrief.
So when every time Trump would say something, Biden gets on. I've never heard so much malarkey in my life.
Period.
Yeah.
Period.
Come on.
The first thing, the second thing, and the second thing. Period.
There. Oh man. The the Medicare thing. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death. But man, no, all seriousness, it's sad what they're doing to him, to Biden. Like
Oh yeah.
he's in no condition, and I think that was made clear, hopefully on a global stage. Dude, I was YouTubing and Googling some highlights and lowlights and everything, and it was interesting. I saw a news reporting in Australia about the debate, and they had a before and after, what their thoughts on it were before and what their thoughts on it were after. People, they're they're wondering what's happening, and it's not just in our country. It's other countries are looking at us like
Guarantee it.
this is your president,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. We need to preach more from it in the pulpit, I guess. So
oh, I can't wait for that episode. That'll be good. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's.
ooh,
What does that even mean?
means the tithe.
All right, this has been episode, I don't remember what episode of the episode titled Pastoral Rolls. There's a quick shot of that mug that you can get, link in description to that store, the Not Good Podcast mug, as well as other merch. And check us out, like, follow, subscribe, whatever platform you're on, and ring the bells so you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the Not Good Podcast. Contact your host, David Jane, at davidj@skyhighmediallc.com.